Those words were never spoken. And because they were never spoken, the house remained calm. Nights passed quietly along the wooden street. Lanterns glowed without hurry. Footsteps came and went, leaving no trace behind. Inside the house, everything followed a familiar rhythm. Nothing rushed. Nothing needed to be explained. This was how it had always been, and how it would continue to be. In the Old West, there were places that everyone knew about, yet no one spoke of openly. They stood at the edge of town, never in the center, always a little apart, always close enough to be seen, but far enough to be ignored. By daylight, these buildings looked ordinary. Wooden walls faded by sun and dust, windows covered by thick curtains, doors closed, sometimes locked, sometimes just resting in place as if no one inside needed protection. People passed by without stopping, without looking too closely, without asking questions. It was understood that these places did not belong to the daytime. During the day, they were quiet. No laughter, no music, no footsteps on the porch. Only stillness, the kind of stillness that felt deliberate, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Children were guided to the other side of the street. Wives tightened their shawls and walked a little faster. Men kept their eyes forward, pretending not to notice the shape of the balconies or the carved wooden railings. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be said. In towns across the Old West, silence was often more powerful than words. When the sun began to lower, the town changed. Shadows grew longer. The heat softened. The noise of the day faded into the sound of boots, horses, and distant voices. That was when the doors opened. Not all at once, not dramatically. One lamp would appear first, glowing behind a curtain. Then another. Light spilled onto the wooden porch in a soft amber color. Music followed, slow piano notes drifting into the street. Laughter came next. Not loud, not wild. Controlled, measured. The kind of laughter meant to be heard, but not examined. By night, the building no longer looked empty. It looked awake. Men arrived alone or in small groups. They came from saloons, from hotels, from the outskirts of town. Some wore clean coats. Some carried the dust of the road on their boots. They climbed the steps without hesitation, as if drawn by habit, as if the path had been walked many times before. No one greeted them at the door during the early hours. They were expected. They were known. Inside, voices stayed low. Names were rarely spoken. Questions were unnecessary. The rules of the house did not hang on the walls. They were not written down. They were learned quickly. Do not ask about the past. Do not ask about the future. Do not ask who lived here before or who left. And above all, do not ask what happens when the lights go out. The women who appeared on the balconies did not shout or wave. They leaned against the railings. They smiled slowly. They watched the street below with calm, knowing eyes. Some stood alone. Some stood together. Each held herself differently. One rested her arm along the wood, relaxed and confident. Another tilted her head, studying faces as if committing them to memory. Another simply watched, saying nothing at all. They did not call out to passers-by. They did not need to. Everyone already knew why they were there. Yet even then, there were things no one was allowed to say. Not in the street. Not inside the building. Not even in whispers. People believed they understood these houses. They believed they knew what happened behind the doors. But belief was safer than truth, because truth carried weight. And weight had a way of sinking things that were meant to float. The town depended on these places more than it admitted. They brought money. They brought travelers. They brought influence. The sheriff knew who came and went. The shop owners benefited from the extra business. The hotel kept rooms full, and yet no one claimed responsibility. If asked, they would say it was none of their concern, that it was simply how things were done in the Old West. Survival often meant accepting what could not be changed, or what people pretended could not be changed. Inside the house, the air was thick with perfume and smoke. Candles flickered gently, casting moving shadows across the walls. The piano played the same slow songs each night, not because the pianist lacked skill, but because the rhythm was intentional. Fast music excited the mind. Slow music calmed it. Calm people asked fewer questions. Rooms upstairs remained closed during the early hours. Their doors lined the hallway like silent witnesses. Some had names written on small plaques. Some did not. Guests were guided without words. A touch on the arm, a glance toward the stairs. Everything flowed smoothly, like a routine practice for years. No one spoke about the rooms at the far end of the hall. No one lingered near them, and no one asked why the doors there showed more wear than the others. When midnight passed, the building felt different. The laughter softened. Voices dropped lower. The piano slowed even more. Outside, the town slept. Inside, time stretched. There were moments when the house seemed to listen. As if the walls themselves remembered every word ever spoken within them, every promise, every lie. And every silence. Some men stayed until the early hours. Others left before midnight, faces unreadable. A few never returned again. Their absence was noticed, but never discussed. Horses were found the next morning still tied to posts. Hotel rooms remained unpaid. Belongings stayed where they had been left. If someone asked questions, they were met with shrugs. People moved on quickly. In the Old West, asking too much was dangerous. By morning, the building returned to its earlier state. Curtains drawn, lights extinguished, doors closed. Any trace of the night was carefully erased. Floors were cleaned, glasses removed, candles replaced. It was as if nothing had happened at all. The women disappeared from the balconies. The piano fell silent. Only faint marks on the wooden steps hinted that the night had existed, and even those faded quickly under the sun. Travelers passing through during the day saw nothing unusual. Just another quiet street, another closed building. They would never guess what the town refused to speak about. They would never know how carefully the silence was maintained. Because silence was protection. Silence kept order. Silence kept secrets. And in places like this, secrets were more valuable than gold. As years passed, towns grew and shrank. Railroads changed direction. Mines dried up. But the memory of these houses lingered. Not in official records, not in church documents. Only in looks exchanged, in conversations that stopped abruptly, in stories that began but were never finished. Old West was built on stories, but the most important ones were the ones left untold. This was one of them, a pause. Story that began every night when the lamps were lit, and ended every morning when the doors closed again. A story hidden behind curtains, behind smiles, behind rules that no one dared to break. Because inside these houses, there were things no one was allowed to say. And some truths, once spoken, could never be taken back. Nothing inside those houses worked the way people expected. There were no signs explaining what was allowed and what was forbidden. No printed rules. No warnings nailed to the walls. Yet everyone who stepped inside seemed to understand almost immediately. The rules were not spoken. They were felt. They lived in the pauses between words. in the way conversation stopped before going too far, in the way eyes shifted when certain subjects came close to being mentioned. One of the first things learned was this: names did not matter. Men were rarely asked for theirs, and the women almost never gave theirs. If a name was spoken, it was usually not real. It was chosen for the night, chosen to be forgotten. Real names belonged to the world outside, to families, to towns far away. Inside the house, names were unnecessary weight. Questions about the past were met with smiles that did not reach the eyes. Questions about where someone came from drifted away unanswered. Questions about where someone might go next were quietly ignored. The house existed only in the present moment. What had come before did not matter. What came after was not discussed. Those who insisted on asking learned quickly that curiosity made people uncomfortable. And discomfort in places like this was dangerous. There were other rules as well. Do not count how many women lived there. Do not ask why the number changed. Do not ask why some rooms stayed empty for weeks, then suddenly reopened. Do not ask why certain doors were always locked. Especially the doors at the far end of the upper hallway. They were older than the others, their wood darker, their handles worn smooth by hands long gone. No one ever cleaned those doors in front of guests. Dust was allowed to settle there, as if drawing attention would invite something unwanted. Newcomers sometimes noticed. They sometimes asked. Their questions were answered with silence, or with a gentle redirection, a touch on the arm, a smile, a suggestion to move somewhere else. Most understood. Those who did not rarely stayed long. The women learned the rules faster than anyone else. They had to. From the moment they arrived, they were taught what not to say. Do not speak of sickness. Do not speak of fear. Do not speak of pain that lingers after the night ends. And never speak of the women who were no longer there. Some arrived by wagon, some by train, some with men who did not stay. They carried small bags, a dress or two, personal items chosen carefully. Very few brought photographs. Photographs tied a person to somewhere else. Inside the house, belonging somewhere else was not encouraged. Each woman was shown her room, shown where to eat, shown when to rest. They were told which clients to avoid, which nights would be busy, which subjects were never to be mentioned. There was always one rule repeated more than the others. Do not talk about what happens upstairs after midnight. The house changed after that hour. Before midnight, things were predictable. The laughter, the music, the movement of people up and down the stairs. After midnight, the tone shifted. The piano slowed until sometimes it stopped completely. The candles burned lower. Voices dropped until words blurred together. Some rooms remained dark. Others stayed lit far longer than expected. No one was assigned to the rooms at the end of the hall. If someone found herself there, it was never by mistake. Those rooms were not for everyone. The women knew this. They did not speak of it to each other, but they noticed patterns. Who was called away quietly? Who returned shaken? Who did not return at all? The next morning, beds were stripped. Belongings disappeared. The space was reclaimed as if no one had ever lived there. No. Mourning was allowed. Grief drew attention. Attention brought questions. And questions threatened the balance. The house relied on balance. Not kindness. Not fairness. Balance. The men who visited often believed they were in control. They believed money gave them power. That doors opened because they paid. But there were limits even money could not cross. Some men drank too much and spoke too freely. They laughed loudly. They boasted. They tried to ask about the locked rooms, about the women who were suddenly gone. Their laughter usually faded by the end of the night. Some were warned quietly. Some were escorted out politely. A few were never seen again. Their absence was handled carefully. No announcements. No searches. If someone asked, they were told the man had moved on, gone to another town, headed west. In the Old West, disappearing was common enough to sound believable. The sheriff understood this better than most. He visited the house like any other man, never in uniform, never officially. He did not ask questions either. He accepted what he was given. In return, the house was left alone. No inspections, no raids, no reports filed. Order was maintained. The same was true of the judge, the banker, the men who ran the stores and the saloons. They all knew, and they all benefited. Silence became a shared agreement. Not written, not sworn, but understood. The women learned quickly who could be trusted and who could not. Some men listened without hearing. Some heard but did not care. Others noticed too much. Those men were guided, carefully, distracted, redirected. If failed, they were not invited back. Trust inside the house was fragile. A single careless word could break it. That was why conversations stayed shallow. Weather, travel, music. Anything that did not matter. Anything that would not linger in the mind. Real thoughts were kept hidden. Some women whispered to each other late at night. Long after the candles were out, they spoke softly, barely breathing the words. They shared memories of places they once called home, faces they feared they would forget. But even then, certain names were never spoken. Not even in whispers. Fear was not loud in the house. It was quiet. It lived in routines, in habits formed quickly. In the way women learned to sleep lightly. In the way they listened for footsteps in the hallway. The house never truly slept. Someone was always awake. Watching, listening, ensuring the rules were followed. New women sometimes tested the boundaries. They asked why they could not leave on certain days, why letters were collected before being sent, why visitors were sometimes turned away without explanation. They were told it was for their safety. And outside the house, the world was dangerous. This was not entirely untrue, but it was not the whole truth either. Letters were often held longer than promised. Some were never sent at all. The women were told mail was unreliable, that trains were delayed. Over time, many stopped writing. Without letters, ties to the outside weakened. Days blended together. The house became the only constant. Rules that once felt restrictive began to feel normal. Silence became easier. The longer someone stayed, the less they spoke. Words were replaced by gestures, by glances. By understanding what was expected without being told. The house rewarded compliance, better rooms, easier clients, small privileges. Those who followed the rules were protected. Those who did not were reminded, sometimes gently, sometimes not. No one ever spoke of punishment. Punishment suggested wrongdoing. The house did not see itself as wrong, but it saw itself as necessary. Necessary for the town. Necessary for order. Necessary for survival. And so the rules remained unwritten, unspoken, passed from one person to the next like an inheritance no one wanted, but everyone accepted. Years later, some would try to explain. what they had seen. They would struggle to find the right words, because how does one describe rules that were never stated? How does one explain the silence that shaped every moment? The truth was simple, yet difficult to accept. Inside those houses, freedom existed only on the surface. Below it, there was structure, control, expectation, and beneath that, something darker, something no one was allowed to name. That was the real rule. Not that people could not speak, but that some truths, once spoken, would change everything. And the house could not allow that, so the rules stayed silent, and everyone inside learned to do the same. The women who lived inside those houses did not belong to the towns around them. That much was clear. Even if no one ever said it out loud, they were present, yet never included. Seen, yet never acknowledged beyond the doors. Known, yet never truly known. They did not attend church. They did not shop during the busy hours. They did not walk freely through town in daylight. When they did step outside, it was brief, controlled, watched. Most townspeople could not recall seeing the same woman twice in public, inside the house. However, time moved differently. Days blended together without clear beginnings or endings. Morning arrived quietly. Evening returned without warning. The women learned to measure time by routine rather than by clocks. Meals, music, footsteps on the stairs. That was how days passed. Many arrived believing they would stay only a short while, a few months perhaps, long enough to save money, long enough to move on. That belief faded quickly. Opportunities to leave were rare, and when they came, they often disappeared just as quickly. Some women were told they could go once a debt was paid. Others were promised freedom after a certain season. The terms were never written, the numbers never clear. Debts seemed to grow instead of shrink. Food, clothing, room, and board. Everything had a cost. The house kept careful track, not in ledgers shown to the women, but in books kept elsewhere. Books that never left the building. Questions about money were discouraged. The women learned to accept what they were given, and to stop asking for more. Their identities slowly faded. Not all at once. At first, they remembered where they came from. They remembered names of streets, faces of relatives, but memory requires reinforcement, and inside the house, there was little to remind them of another life. Letters went unanswered. Photographs were lost or taken away. Stories were met with polite nods, then forgotten. Over time, many stopped talking about their past altogether. It was easier that way. Names given inside. The house replaced the ones they were born with. Nicknames, stage names. They were chosen to be pleasant, easy to remember, easy to forget. When a woman left, her name stayed behind. It could be given to someone else. No one questioned this. Belonging to the house meant being replaceable. Some women arrived strong and defiant. They spoke openly. They resisted the rules. Those women did not last long, not because they were punished openly, but because resistance brought exhaustion. The house wore people down quietly, through repetition, through lack of options. Eventually, even the strongest voices softened. Others arrived already broken, fleeing something worse. They adapted quickly. They understood the value of silence instinctively. Those women survived longer. Friendships formed slowly. Trust was difficult. Everyone knew that attachment could be dangerous. When someone disappeared, those closest to her felt it most. And yet, grief had to be hidden. There were no goodbyes, no explanations. One day, a bed would be empty, a room cleared. By evening, someone else might occupy the space. Life inside the house continued. The women learned not to ask where the others had gone. They learned to stop expecting answers. Some believed the women had escaped. Others believed they had been sent elsewhere. A few suspected something darker. But suspicion required acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was not allowed. The house discouraged curiosity. It rewarded acceptance. There were moments of quiet rebellion. Small ones, a shared glance, a whispered word after lights out. Sometimes a woman would hide a personal item, a ribbon, a letter never sent. These small acts helped preserve a sense of self, that they were risky. Rooms were checked regularly. Nothing escaped notice for long. Those who tried to hold on to too much were reminded where they were. Reminders came in different forms. A change in schedule, a less desirable room, a warning spoken gently but firmly. No threats were necessary. The women understood the boundaries. They knew how easily comfort could be withdrawn. Comfort was the house's greatest tool. The women were fed, sheltered, protected from the harshness of the outside world. In return, they were expected to comply. The arrangement was presented as fair, and compared to the dangers beyond the walls, it often seemed that way. The Old West was unforgiving. Out there, women disappeared without anyone noticing. Inside the house, at least someone noticed. At least there was structure. This belief kept many from trying to leave. Fear of the unknown was stronger than the discomfort of staying. The house cultivated this fear carefully. Stories of violence outside were shared freely. Stories of escape were not. New arrivals were warned about the dangers of the road, about men who could not be trusted, about towns that were worse than this one. The message was clear. This place may not be perfect, but it is safer than anywhere else. For some, that was enough. Years passed. Faces changed. But the rhythm remained. The women learned to read the house like a living thing. They knew when it was pleased, when it was tense. They sensed when something was about to change. Changes usually came quietly. A new rule, a new expectation. Rarely explained, simply enforced. The women adjusted. They always did. What surprised some was how quickly the outside world faded. Memories blurred. Dates lost meaning. Without seasons to mark time, years slipped by unnoticed. A woman might realize suddenly that she had been there far longer than she intended. The realization often came at night. In moments of stillness, when the house was quiet and thoughts had room to surface. Those moments were dangerous. They led to longing, and longing led to pain. The women learned to distract themselves. Music, conversation, sleep. Anything to avoid thinking too deeply. Because thinking led back to questions. And questions were forbidden. Not officially. But effectively. Some women tried to imagine a future beyond the house. They pictured themselves leaving, starting over somewhere new. The images were vague, without details. Details made the fantasy feel fragile. Better to keep it blurred. Better to focus on the next day. The next night. The house encouraged this mindset. It rewarded those who stayed present. Who did not dwell on what they could not change. Gradually, the idea of belonging elsewhere felt unrealistic. The house became the center of existence. The women belonged to a Dot and nowhere else. This was never stated outright. It did not need to be Dot. It was communicated through routine, through restriction, through silence. Belonging was not a matter of choice. Dot, it was a condition. Those who accepted it found a strange sense of stability. Those who did not struggled quietly. The house did not tolerate open despair. Sadness was allowed within limits. Fear was understandable, but hopelessness threatened. Order. Order was everything. The women learned to smile. Not always convincingly, but convincingly enough. They learned to perform not just for the men, but for the house itself. As if the building were watching. Judging. Keeping score. In time, May forgot who they had been. Before. Not completely, but enough. Enough to function. Enough to survive. And survival became the goal. Not freedom. Not happiness. Just survival. That was the unspoken truth of the house. The women did not belong to the town. They did not belong to the world outside. They belonged to the space between, a place where names faded, where time blurred, where silence was safer than speech. And once someone belonged to that place, leaving it was not as simple as opening a door. Because the house did not just hold bodies. It held pieces of people, pieces that were not easily returned. And that was something no one was ever allowed to say. Some rooms inside the house were cleaned every morning. Others were not. No one announced which were which. No signs marked the difference. But over time, everyone learned. The women noticed it first. They saw which doors were opened at dawn and which remained closed. Which beds were stripped and remade. Which rooms were aired out, sunlight allowed to spill across the floor. And which rooms stayed exactly as they were. Dust gathered there undisturbed. Curtains remained drawn. The air behind those doors felt heavier, as if it had not moved in a long time. No one was assigned to clean those rooms. Not because they were unimportant, but because they were. The house treated them differently. When new women arrived, they were shown the common areas, the dining room, the stairs, the hallway of rooms meant for guests. They were not shown the rooms at the far end. Those doors were passed quietly, without comment. If a woman looked too long, she was gently guided away, a hand on her shoulder, a reminder that her room was elsewhere. The message was subtle but clear. Those rooms were not meant to be seen. At first, the women assumed the rooms were unused. Old storage, perhaps. Spaces waiting for repair. But time passed, and still, no one entered them. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. The doors never opened in daylight. They never opened during the busy hours of the night. Yet sometimes, very late, there were signs. A faint sound from behind the wood. A creak that did not match the movement of the building. A change in the air when someone passed too close. No one spoke of it openly, but the women noticed. They noticed that the handles on those doors were worn more smooth than the others, as if many hands had touched them long ago. They noticed faint scratches near the locks, marks that did not look accidental. They noticed that the floorboards just outside those rooms were darker, stained by something that could not be fully scrubbed away. When asked, the house gave no answers. The women learned that some knowledge was not theirs to have. The rooms were never included in nightly routines. No music drifted from behind their doors. No laughter. They existed in silence, a deliberate silence. At times, a woman might be asked to bring linens down the hallway late at night. Always escorted. Always quickly. she would keep her eyes forward. Counter steps. No one told her to do this. She learned on her own because the house was watching. The house always knew who was curious. Curiosity was not punished immediately. It was noted. A woman who lingered too long near the wrong door might find her schedule changed, her clients less desirable, her room reassigned. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind her. Over time, most stopped noticing the rooms at all. The mind learned to skip over them. As if they were not there. That was how the house survived. By teaching people not to see. Occasionally, someone would disappear. Not in a sudden, obvious way. One day, she would be there. The next, her room would be empty. Her belongings gone. Her name unspoken. The women learned not to ask where she had gone, but they noticed patterns. Disappearance often followed a change. A woman who asked too many questions. One who resisted instructions. One who talked about leaving too openly. Sometimes the last place she was seen was near the far end of the hallway. The connection was never confirmed. It did not need to be. The house made its point quietly. Afterward, the locked rooms seemed closer somehow. More present. As if reminding everyone of their existence. Cleaning days came and went. Dust accumulated everywhere else, but not their. No one dusted those doors. No one wiped the handles. They were left exactly as they were. Preserved. As if time was not allowed to touch them. New women sensed the tension immediately. They felt it without understanding it. They slept lightly at first. Listened to the building at night. The house creaked like any old structure. Wood shifting, beams settling. But sometimes there were sounds that did not fit. A soft thud, a faint scrape. Always brief. Never repeated. Those sounds were never acknowledged. The women learned that reacting only made things worse. Fear was acceptable. Open concern was not. The rooms were part of the house's design. They were not mistakes. They served a purpose, though no one ever explained what that purpose was. The women filled the silence with their own theories. Some believed the rooms were once used for storage of valuables. Others thought they were old sleeping quarters from earlier days. A few suspected they had been used for punishment. None of these ideas were confirmed. The uncertainty was the point. Fear thrived best where details were missing. Late at night, when the house was nearly still, the presence of those rooms felt strongest. The air seemed thicker near them. The temperature slightly cooler. Women passing by felt an urge to move faster. To look away. As if the rooms might look back. There were nights when the women dreamed of the locked doors. Dreams where the doors were open, where light spilled out, but inside there was nothing, just emptiness. Those dreams left a lingering unease. The house did not like being imagined too clearly. Even dreams could feel dangerous. The women learned to push such thoughts away, focus on what was known, on routine. Routine was safety. The house rewarded those who followed it without question. Better food, more predictable nights, a sense of stability. Stability was rare in the Old West. Many women told themselves that the locked rooms were simply the cost of that stability. A small mystery in exchange for protection. The house encouraged this belief. It offered comfort in measured amounts. Enough to keep people compliant. Not enough to inspire confidence. The rooms remained untouched through changes in management. Through renovations elsewhere in the building. Walls were repainted, furniture replaced, but those doors stayed the same. Their presence became a constant, a Reminder that not everything was meant to be improved. Some things were meant to remain as they were. The women noticed that no men ever asked about the locked rooms, not directly. Those who did were discouraged from returning. It was done politely. An explanation offered, a suggestion to find entertainment elsewhere. The men accepted it. They understood that some boundaries existed even here. Money opened many doors, but not all. The rooms at the end of the hall did not belong to the men. They did not belong to the women either. They belonged to the house itself, and the house did not share. On rare occasions, a woman would be asked to stand guard near the hallway. Not told why, just instructed to stay. She would stand there for hours, listening that no one would pass. No doors would open. When she was finally dismissed, there would be no explanation, only a warning. Do not speak of this. Most obeyed. They understood that their position depended on cooperation. The house thrived on obedience. Not forced. Encouraged. The locked rooms became part of the background. An accepted anomaly, like a scar that no one mentioned. Over time, even fear dulled. What remained was caution, a careful awareness of boundaries. The women learned how far they could move without crossing a line. They learned where to look and where not to. The house shaped behavior through silence. It did not need locks everywhere. Only in the right places. When the town outside changed, the rooms did not. When businesses closed, when families moved away, the doors stayed shut. As if they existed outside the flow of time. Some believed the rooms held memories. Others believed they held consequences. Either way, the message was the same. Some parts of the house were not meant to be understood. Understanding led to questions. Questions led to disruption, and disruption threatened everything. The women learned that survival did not require knowing the truth. It required avoiding it. So they passed the doors without looking, without listening. They treated the hallway as if it ended sooner than it did. The house approved. It continued to function smoothly. Nights passed without incident. Days returned quietly. The locked rooms remained untouched, unspoken, and in their silence, they reminded everyone inside of a simple fact. Some spaces existed not to be entered, but to be feared. And fear, when carefully managed, was one of the strongest tools the house possessed. Some men came every week. They arrived on the same night, at nearly the same hour, with the same habits. They ordered the same drinks. They chose the same rooms. Their presence became part of the house's rhythm. The women learned their footsteps, the sound of their voices, the way they laughed or did not. These men were familiar. They tipped well. They followed the rules. They did not ask questions. Because of this, they were welcomed. The house preferred familiarity. Familiar men did not disrupt the balance. They came, stayed for a while, and left again. Always. Until one night, they did not. At first, no one noticed. The house was busy. The nights blended together. A missing face was easy to overlook. But then it happened again. A man who always arrived on Tuesdays did not appear. Another who favored the early hours stopped coming altogether. The women noticed before anyone else. They noticed empty chairs, unused glasses, rooms that were prepared but never occupied. The house noticed, too, but it did not react. Not immediately. Absence was not unusual in the Old West. Men moved on. They followed gold, land, rumors of opportunity. Disappearance was common, enough to be believable. But some absences felt different. Some men left behind signs, a hat still hanging by the door, a coat never retrieved from the cloakroom, money left unpaid at the bar, a horse tied outside until morning. These details unsettled the women. Men who planned to leave did not leave things behind. They took what belonged to them. Still, no one asked questions. The house did not encourage it. If a woman mentioned that a regular had not been seen, the comment was met with indifference. He moved on. He found another place. He went west. The explanations were simple, too simple, and always the same. The women learned to accept them, even when they did not believe them. The town outside noticed eventually. The stable owner wondered why a horse had not been claimed. The hotel clerk questioned an unpaid room, but concerns faded quickly. The sheriff handled such matters quietly. He reassured those who asked. Men came and went all the time. Nothing unusual. The tone of his voice discouraged further discussion. The house continued to operate as it always had. Music played. Lights glowed. Men climbed the steps each night. But the number of familiar faces slowly decreased. New men arrived. They did not know the routines. They did not understand the rules right away. They spoke louder. They drank more. The women adjusted. They always did. But the loss of the familiar man was felt. Those men had been predictable. Predictability meant safety. New men brought uncertainty. Uncertainty made the house tense. The women sensed it. They became more careful, more attentive. The house responded by tightening its control. Schedules were adjusted. Movements monitored more closely. No explanations were given. One night, a woman noticed something unusual. A familiar man in the room had been cleaned. Not as if he had checked out, but as if he had never been there. His belongings were gone. The bed stripped completely. No trace remained. By morning, the room had been reassigned. The woman said nothing. She understood the message. Some men were not meant to be remembered. Another disappearance followed. Then another. The pattern became difficult to ignore. The men who vanished shared certain traits. They were observant, quiet. They noticed details. They asked small questions. Nothing obvious, nothing confrontational. But enough. The house did not tolerate attention, especially not the kind that lingered. Men who stayed long enough began to notice things. The locked rooms, the silence after midnight, the women who disappeared. Some men became curious. Curiosity was dangerous. A man who asked about a missing woman might stop returning. A man who wandered too far down the hallway might not leave. The house handled these situations without drama. No arguments. No violence witnessed. Just quiet resolutions. By morning, the problem was gone. The women did not see what happened. They only saw the results. Empty rooms. Reassigned spaces. A sense of tension that slowly eased once the balance was restored. The house did not enjoy disorder. It acted to prevent it. Men who understood the rules were allowed to stay. Those who did not were removed. Removed so cleanly that even memory struggled to hold on to them. The women learned not to form attachments to regulars. Not anymore. Attachment created questions. Questions led to risk. So they treated every night as temporary. Every man as passing through. even the ones who had been there for years. One morning, the women overheard a conversation. Two men from town speaking quietly near the entrance. They mentioned a name. A familiar one. A man who had been coming for months. They wondered aloud where he had gone. Their voices dropped. They looked around. Then the conversation ended. The name was not spoken again. Names had power, and power was not shared lightly. The house preferred anonymity. The more anonymous someone was, the easier they were to erase. That applied to men as much as women. The women began to realize something unsettling. The house did not just control who came inside, it controlled who left. Leaving was a privilege, not a guarantee. Some men left early. Some stayed late. Some never left at all. The women sensed that the house decided, not money. Not status, the house, it was as if the building itself judged who belonged and who did not. Men who fit into the rhythm passed through without issue. Men who disrupted it were removed. The house protected itself. That was its priority, by doing so. It protected the town as well, or so the town believed. Because the disappearances did not cause chaos, there were no public investigations. No accusations, life continued. The absence of a few men did not disrupt daily routines. The town accepted the explanation that these men had moved on. They wanted to believe it. Belief was easier than doubt. Doubt demanded action, and action threatened stability. The women understood this. They saw how easily the town looked away, how quickly concern faded. The house took note. It learned how much it could hide, and how little anyone wanted to see. Over time, the women noticed fewer questions from new men. Word had spread, not openly, but through suggestion, through reputation. This was a place where certain boundaries existed, where some curiosity was unwelcome. Men who sought only distraction continued to arrive. Men who sought understanding stayed away. The house preferred it. That way, understanding complicated things. The women adjusted their behavior accordingly. They discouraged conversation beyond the surface. They laughed at jokes, they redirected attention. They protected themselves by protecting the house. Survival required cooperation. The disappearances became part of the unspoken. Structured. They were not discussed, not even among the women, but they influenced behavior. They reinforced the rules. They reminded everyone of the consequences of crossing invisible lines. At night, when the house was quiet, the women sometimes thought of the missing men. They wondered what had happened. Where they had gone. But those thoughts were fleeting. Lingering on them brought discomfort. Discomfort attracted attention, and attention was dangerous. By morning, the thoughts faded. Routine returned. The house continued. The doors opened each night. Lights glowed. Music played. New men climbed the steps. The women smiled, and the absence of familiar faces slowly became normal. This was how the house maintained control. Not through force, but through disappearance. Through the quiet removal of those who did not belong. And through the town's willingness to accept silence as explanation. In the Old West, survival often depended on knowing when not to ask. The men who vanished learned that too late. And the women learned to remember them only briefly, because inside the house, memory was dangerous, and forgetting was another form of safety. She was not the mayor. She was not the sheriff. She did not wear a badge, and she never stood on a stage. Yet everyone in town knew her. And more importantly, everyone answered to her in one way or another. She was the woman who ran the house. People called her different names. Some called her Madam. Some used her last name, spoken carefully. Others did not use any name at all. Inside the house, she was simply understood. She did not appear often. When she did, it was brief. She moved through the rooms quietly, without hurry. Her footsteps were light, but they carried weight. Conversations lowered when she entered a space. Laughter softened, not out of fear. Out of awareness. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to threaten. Her presence was enough. That she knew everything that happened inside the house. Who arrived early, who stayed late, who paid well, who caused problems. She knew which women were tired, which were restless, which were thinking about leaving. She knew before they said anything. That was what made her powerful. She listened more than she spoke. And when she spoke, people listened. The women learned quickly that honesty with her was risky, not because she punished lies harshly, but because she remembered everything. Every word spoken in her presence stayed with her. She did not forget. She did not forgive easily, and she did not need reminders. The town's most important men visited the house regularly. They never came officially, never in uniform. They arrived like everyone else. Quietly. The sheriff removed his badge before entering. The judge loosened his collar. The banker paid in cash. Inside the house, titles meant nothing, or so it seemed. But she remembered them. She remembered who they were outside, and what they needed kept quiet. That knowledge was her currency. She did not ask for favors. She did not have to. Protection came naturally. The house was never raided, never inspected too closely. Problems were handled privately. Reports went missing. Complaints were forgotten. The town slept better believing the house was under control. And it was, just not in the way they imagined. The women rarely spoke to her directly. When they did, it was brief. Requests were made carefully. Questions phrased gently. She listened. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she did not. When she refused, she did not explain. Explanations invited argument. Argument invited instability. She valued stability above all else. The women who understood this survived the longest. Those who challenged her authority did not last. Not because they were removed immediately, but because the house became colder to them. Schedule shifted. Privileges disappeared. Comfort faded. Eventually, most learned. Resistance was exhausting. Compliance was easier. She was not cruel in obvious ways. She did not strike the women. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her power came from structure. From knowing exactly how far she could push without breaking anything. She gave the women just enough. Enough food, enough rest, enough safety. Not enough to feel secure. Security encouraged independence. Independence threatened control. The women lived in a careful balance. Grateful, but not comfortable. Safe, but not free. She designed it that way. Men often underestimated her. They saw only a woman running a business. They believed money made them equal. They were wrong. She knew their secrets. She knew who cheated on their wives, who owed money, who had blood on their hands. She never used this knowledge openly. She did not need to. A single reminder was enough. A quiet word. A glance. The men understood. They left satisfied and compliant. The house thrived under her control. It expanded when needed, contracted when times were hard. She knew when to invest, when to hold back. She knew which towns were worth staying in, which ones were dying. When the time came, she would leave, and the house would close without warning. That knowledge unsettled the women. They knew the house did not belong to them. It belonged to her, and she belonged to no one. The locked rooms were under her authority. That much was clear. No one entered them without her approval. No one cleaned them. No one spoke of them. Even the women who had been there the longest avoided them. The madam never explained their purpose. She never needed to. The rooms existed as a reminder, a boundary, a place where her power was absolute. When someone disappeared, the women often wondered if she had decided. They never knew for certain. That uncertainty was deliberate. Certainty invited blame. Uncertainty invited caution. The house functioned best when people were cautious. She encouraged distance between the women. Friendship was allowed. Dependence was not. Women who grew too close were separated. Not harshly. Just enough to weaken the bond. She understood human behavior. She knew that united people asked questions. Isolated people adapted. The women learned to keep their thoughts to themselves. They learned to share lightly. Deep trust was dangerous. She allowed hope in small doses. A promise here, a suggestion there, enough to keep the women moving forward. Not enough to let them plan too far ahead. The future remained vague. Vagueness kept people focused on the present. And the present belonged to her. The town respected her. Some feared her. Most pretended not to notice her influence. They preferred to believe the house ran itself, that things happened naturally. This belief kept their consciences clear. She allowed it. She did not seek recognition. Recognition attracted scrutiny. Scrutiny invited trouble. She preferred shadows. From the shadows, she controlled everything. Years passed. Men came and went. Women arrived and disappeared. But she remained unchanged. As if time moved differently around her. Some said she had been there longer than the house itself. Others believed she would outlast it. No one knew the truth, and no one dared ask. The women sometimes wondered what she wanted. Power? Money? Neither seemed to satisfy her. She already had both. What she wanted was order. Order. In a chaotic world, the Old West was violent, unpredictable. She built something stable inside it. Something controlled. That control required sacrifice. She accepted that. And expected others to accept it too. The women lived within the system she created. They suffered because of it. But they also survived because of it. That contradiction kept them quiet. The madam did not see herself as cruel. She saw herself as necessary. Necessary for the house. Necessary for the town. Necessary for keeping worse things outside. And perhaps she was right. Perhaps without her, the women would have faced dangers far greater. Or Perhaps she simply replaced one danger with another. That question was never answered. It did not matter. Because she held the power. And power did not need to explain itself. Inside the house, everyone understood this truth. They lived by it. They benefited from it. They suffered under it. And they never spoke of it openly. Because the madam was listening. She was always listening. And in a place built on silence, being heard was the most dangerous thing of all. There were women in the house who seemed untouched by time. At first, no one questioned it. The Old West was full of hard lives. People aged quickly. Others disappeared before anyone noticed. So when a woman looked the same year after year, it felt easier not to think about it. But eventually, the pattern became difficult to ignore. New women arrived with fresh faces. They carried the marks of travel, sunburned skin, tired eyes. They changed quickly. Long nights left their trace. Sleep came lightly. Smiles became practiced. Within a year, most looked older than when they arrived, except for a few. These women stayed exactly the same. Their hair did not thin. Their posture did not bend. Their eyes did not dull. They wore the same expressions they always had: calm, knowing, unmoved. The women noticed first that they always did. They shared looks when passing in the hallway. They compared memories. Had she been here last year? The year before that? No one could remember her arriving. No one could remember her leaving. The house offered no answers. The women who did not age were not assigned rooms like the others. They moved freely. They appeared where they were needed. On the balcony, near the stairs. Sometimes they were there in the evening. Sometimes not. No schedule seemed to apply to them. They spoke less than most. When they did speak, their words were measured. They never complained, never asked for favors. They never talked about the past, and never about the future. New women sometimes mistook them for authority. They asked questions. How long have you been here? What happens if I want to leave? The answers were vague. A soft smile, a gentle redirection. Time here moves differently. Things work themselves out. The words sounded comforting. They were not. The women who did not age seemed to belong to the house in a way. Others did not. They knew the rules without being told. They sensed changes before they happened. When tension rose, they were already calm. When someone disappeared, they did not react as if they had expected it. This unsettled the others because it suggested familiarity. Familiarity with outcomes no one wanted to face. The madam trusted these women. That much was clear. They were allowed into spaces others were not. They were sent on errands no one questioned. Sometimes they stood near the locked rooms. Not guarding. Just present. As if reminding everyone that those spaces were accounted for. The women began to whisper. They spoke late at night, carefully. Maybe they were relatives of the madam. Maybe they had been paid in a different way. Maybe they knew something. Theories shifted and faded. None felt complete. Because none explained the central detail. Time did not touch these women. Years passed. The town changed. Buildings were replaced. People moved on, but the women remained. Their faces became familiar to generations of visitors. Men noticed too. Some joked about it. They laughed and said the house had found the secret to youth. Their laughter was not shared. Those jokes did not last. Men who focused too much on the unchanging women were discouraged. They were steered elsewhere. If they insisted, they stopped returning. The women learned that attention was dangerous, especially the wrong kind. The unaging women never seemed surprised by this. They accepted it without comment. As if they had seen it many times before. One woman, newer than the others, finally asked directly. She spoke quietly when she thought no one else could hear. "How long have you really been here?" The unaging woman studied her for a moment, not with anger, with something closer to pity. "Long enough," she said. That was all. The answer ended the conversation. The younger woman never asked again, not because she had been threatened, but because the answer felt heavy. As if it carried more truth than could be handled. The unaging women did not sleep as much as the others. They were awake during the quiet hours, when the house was nearly still, when even the piano had stopped. They walked the hallways slowly. Listening. Sometimes they'd pause near certain doors. Sometimes they placed a hand on the wall. As if feeling for something beneath the surface. No one interrupted them. It was understood that they were not to be disturbed. The women who noticed this began to feel uneasy. The house no longer felt like just a building. It felt like a place that remembered, and these women seemed connected to that memory. Some believed the women had given up something important, something that could not be reclaimed. In exchange, they were allowed to remain. Forever. Others believed the women were simply trapped, that they had been there so long, they no longer knew how to leave. That time had stopped for them because their lives had stopped. Both ideas were unsettling. The truth, whatever it was, remained unspoken. The unaging women did not take clients the way others did. When they did, it was rare, and those nights were handled differently. No music played. No laughter drifted from the room. The door closed quietly, and when it opened again, the man left early. He did not look back. Some left town soon after. Others stayed, but never returned to the house. They did not speak of the experience. If asked, they changed the subject. The women noticed how carefully the house handled these moments, as if protecting something fragile. Or dangerous. The madam never explained the role of these women. She did not need to. The women understood that explanation would only invite questions. And questions were not allowed. The presence of the unaging women changed the atmosphere of the house. It reminded everyone that not all fates were the same, that staying too long might mean something different than simply growing older. The women began to think more carefully about time. They counted years differently. They watched their own reflections more closely, looking for signs of change. And fearing the absence of them, because aging meant movement. Movement meant the possibility of leaving. Not aging meant permanence. Permanence was frightening. The unaging women did not show fear. They moved through the house with quiet certainty, as if they had accepted something long ago. That acceptance made them powerful, not in an obvious way, but in a way that commanded space. The women stepped aside when they passed, not because they were told to, because it felt necessary. At night, when sleep came slowly, some women dreamed of becoming like them. Standing in the hallway, unchanged. Watching years pass without being touched. The dreams were calm, They woke with a sense of lost Dot, as if something important had slipped away. The house did not correct these fears, Dot. It allowed them to exist. Fear, when controlled, reinforced obedience. The unaging women were part of that control, living reminders of what staying could mean, Dot, and what leaving might cost. Eventually, the women stopped trying to understand. Dot. Understanding required answers. And answers were not available. Dot. They accepted the presence of the unaging women as part of the house. Like the locked rooms, like the rules, like the silence. The house continued to function. Nights passed. Years accumulated. The unaging women remained. Their faces unchanged, their eyes steady. They watched new women arrive. They watched others disappear. They never commented. They never interfered. They simply existed. And in doing so, they quietly shaped the behavior of everyone around them. Because nothing was more unsettling than the idea that time itself could be negotiated. That aging might not be inevitable. That staying too long could mean becoming something else, something that belonged to the house forever. This possibility was never discussed, that it did not need to be. The unaging women were proof enough. They stood on the balconies. They moved through the halls, silent reminders that the house did not just take time. It kept it. And once it did not give it back. The crying always began after midnight, not immediately after the lamps were dimmed. Not while the piano still echoed faintly in memory. It came later. When the house believed everyone should already be asleep. At first, it was difficult to tell where the sound came from. It moved. Some nights it seemed close, just beyond the wall. Other nights it drifted from above or below. It was never loud. It never demanded attention. That was what made it impossible to ignore. The crying was slow. Measured. As if whoever made the sound had learned to keep it contained. No sobbing, no gasping, just a steady release of grief. The women noticed it individually before they spoke of it together. One lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was a dream. Another sat up in bed, holding her breath, listening carefully. Was someone hurt? Was someone being punished? No bells rang. No doors slammed. The house remained still. Eventually, the women began to acknowledge it. Quietly. In the morning, someone would ask, casually, "Did you hear something last night?" The answers were hesitant. Yes. Maybe. I thought I did. No one described it directly. As if naming it would make it stronger. The madam never mentioned the crying. Not once. That silence was deliberate. It told the women everything they needed to know. The crying was not an accident. It was not a mistake. It was part of the house. Some women tried to find the source. They waited until late. They stepped into the hallway. The sound shifted when they moved. It retreated. Or perhaps it only felt that way. The corridors absorbed sound strangely at night. Footsteps vanished. Whispers flattened against the walls. The house seemed to listen more than it spoke. One woman followed the crying too far. She walked barefoot, slowly, down a corridor rarely used. The air felt colder there. The crying softened. Then stopped. She stood alone, surrounded by silence. The next morning, her room was empty. Her name was not spoken again. After that, curiosity faded. Fear replaced it. The women learned to stay still when the crying began. They pulled blankets closer. They slowed their breathing. They reminded themselves it was not their concern. That involvement brought consequences. The crying returned night after night. Sometimes it lasted minutes. Sometimes longer. It always ended the same. Wait. Abruptly. As if a door had been closed or a decision had been made. The women who had been there longest reacted differently. They did not tense. They did not whisper. They accepted the sound with resignation. Some even slept through it. That acceptance disturbed the new women more than the crying itself. It suggested familiarity, and familiarity meant repetition. The crying was not always sorrowful. That became clear over time. Some nights it carried anger, a sharp edge beneath the restraint. Other nights sounded tired. Worn down. As if the person making the sound had cried many times before and expected to cry many times again. The women tried to imagine who it could be. A girl locked away. A woman who had refused something. A reminder. But none of these ideas explained why the crying was allowed. Why it was tolerated. The house controlled everything else. Noise, movement, light. Why not this? The answer came slowly. The crying served a purpose. It reminded the women that silence was earned. That comfort was conditional. That whatever safety they felt existed only because something worse was contained elsewhere. The crying was a warning, not spoken, but understood. Some women dreamed about it. In their dreams, they walked toward the sound. They found rooms without doors. Beds without sheets. Faces turned toward walls. They woke before seeing too much. Always before recognition. The unaging women never reacted to the crying. They did not stir. They did not pause. If they were awake, they continued whatever they were doing. If asleep, they remained so that indifference felt intentional. As if they knew the source. As if they had already accepted it long ago. One night, the crying changed. It was quieter. Almost polite. The women shrank to hear it, afraid it might disappear. Because disappearance felt worse. The absence of the crying would mean something had shifted. Something unresolved had been resolved. The women preferred the no discomfort. At least it followed a pattern. The crying returned to its usual rhythm the following night. Relief spread quietly. That reaction frightened some of them. Relief should not come from suffering continuing elsewhere. But it did. That was how the house worked. It reshaped priorities. It taught the women to accept unease as stability. Over time, the crying became part of the night. Like the wind, like distant trains. It blended into the background of consciousness. But it never lost its weight. Each time it began, it carried the same message. Someone is paying a price. Someone is bearing something so others do not have to. That understanding kept the women compliant. It encouraged gratitude. As long as the crying was not theirs. The madam eventually addressed the women, not directly. She spoke during the day. When the house was bright, she reminded them of boundaries, of respect. Of the importance of rest. Sleep keeps the mind clear, she said. A clear mind makes fewer mistakes. Mistakes are costly. No one asked about the crying. No one needed to. The message was complete. Do not investigate. Do not interfere. Do not imagine rescue. The crying was not a problem to be solved. That was a condition to be endured. Some women counted nights. How many times they had heard it. They marked the passage of time by it. Others stopped counting altogether. Counting implied an end. An end was not guaranteed. The crying outlasted faces, outlasted names. remained when women left. It remained when new ones arrived. That it was older than most of them, possibly older than the house itself. There were nights when the crying sounded close, enough to touch. The women lay still. They felt the vibration through the walls. It settled into their bones. Those nights were the hardest. Because distance allowed denial. Closeness forced acknowledgement. The crying was human. That truth could not be avoided. Whatever its origin, it belonged to someone who had once spoken freely, who had once laughed, who had once believed they had choices. That realization frightened the women more than any threat, because it suggested a progression, a path, arrival, adjustment, acceptance, containment. They wondered where, on that path, they stood. The house did not answer. It never did. It only continued. The crying faded toward morning. As light crept back into the world, as if darkness was required for it to exist. Daylight brought normalcy. Routine. Smiles returned. The house reset itself. As if nothing had happened. But the women remembered, even when they pretended not to. The crying shaped their dreams, their patience, their obedience. It reminded them that the house had layers. And that the deeper layers were not meant to be seen, only heard. Briefly. At night, when resistance was weakest. And fear was quiet enough to listen, the crying would return. It always did. Because as long as the house stood, there would be something inside it that needed to cry, and something else that needed to hear it. Some men came to the house once, others came often, but a few tried to stay. At first, no one stopped them. The Old West was full of drifting men, miners between claims, cowboys between drives, men who had lost something and were not in a hurry to find it again. The house welcomed them all. Money was accepted. Names were optional. The rules were simple. Enjoy the night. Leave by morning. Most men did, but some lingered. They arrived earlier than needed. They stayed later than expected. They found reasons. A drink, a conversation, a familiar face. The house tolerated this briefly. Too much tolerance, however, created problems. Men who stayed too long began to change. Not suddenly. Gradually. At first, it was harmless. They talked more. They laughed louder. They acted as if the house belonged to them. The women noticed this behavior before it became dangerous. Men who stayed began to forget themselves. They stopped lowering their voices. They stopped respecting boundaries. They lingered in hallways. They asked questions that were not meant to be asked. How long has this place been here? Who owns it, really? Why does it feel so quiet sometimes? The women redirected them. The madam watched. Men who stayed too long also stopped noticing time. They lost track of days. They confused evenings. They returned night after night, sometimes without realizing how many nights had passed. Some stopped sleeping elsewhere. They rented rooms nearby. They spent their waking hours waiting. The house became their center. This was never allowed. The house was a place to pass through, not a place to remain. Men who tried to stay brought imbalance. Attachment. Expectation. Expectation led to entitlement. Entitlement led to disruption. The house corrected disruptions. Quietly. One man began arriving before sunset. He sat at the bar. He did not drink much. He watched. He spoke kindly. He tipped generously. At first, he was tolerated. Then he began waiting for specific women. He asked for them by name. When they were unavailable, He grew irritated. He claimed promises had been made. They had not. The house does not promise. The madam spoke to him. Calmly. She reminded him of the rules. He smiled. He said he understood. He returned the next night. And the next. Eventually, he did not leave. Not fully. He slept in a chair. He dozed in corners. The women felt his presence even when he was silent. One morning, he was gone. His hat remained. No one claimed it. Another man stayed for different reasons. He talked about settling down. He spoke of protection. An investment. He believed money could purchase permanence. The madam listened. Then declined. The house did not need protecting. It had survived without him. That refusal offended him. He began drinking heavily. He became loud. One night, he argued with a door that did not open. He was not seen again. The men who stayed too long often shared one trait. They believed the house owed them something. Comfort, affection, recognition. The house owed nothing. It provided a service. Nothing more. Men who forgot this were corrected. Some corrections were gentle. Men were discouraged. Redirected. Given reasons to leave. Others required stronger measures. Men who stayed too long also began to notice things they should not. They heard the crying at night. They noticed women who did not age. They sensed the weight of the walls. This knowledge unsettled them, but instead of retreating, some leaned in. Curiosity replaced caution. That curiosity was dangerous. Men began asking the wrong women the wrong questions. What's behind that door? Why do some halls stay locked? Why does it feel colder here after midnight? The women did not answer. They smiled. They changed the subject. Men who persisted were watched more closely. The house had a way of narrowing attention. Men who overstayed began to feel isolated. Other men avoided them. Conversations shortened. Smiles faded. They became singular. Visible. That visibility made them vulnerable. One man tried to confront the madam. He demanded explanations. He claimed he deserved honesty. He claimed loyalty. The madam listened without reacting. When he finished, she told him he was no longer welcome. He laughed. He said he would leave when he was ready. He was wrong. The house decided for him. The women never saw. How? They only noticed the absence. His room was cleared. His name faded quickly. Men who stayed too long often left behind belongings. Boots, coats, letters. These items were handled carefully. Some were returned. Some were burned. Some were locked away. The women were told not to touch them. Objects carried residue. Memory. Expectation. It was safer to let the house deal with them. Not all men disappeared. Some left on their own. But they were changed. They walked differently. They avoided eye contact. They spoke less. They did not recommend the house. They did not warn others either. They simply moved on. As if carrying something invisible. The women learned to recognize men who might try to stay. They watched for signs. Too much familiarity. Too many questions. Too little respect for endings. They adjusted their behavior accordingly. They discouraged attachment. They kept conversations light. They reminded men. Subtly, that night's ended. Men who accepted this left peacefully. Men who resisted were handled by the house. The crying at night was not limited to women. That realization came slowly. Some nights, the sound changed. Lower, rougher. The women did not discuss this. but they noticed. The unaging women never reacted. As always. Their indifference suggested understanding. Men who tried to stay misunderstood the house. They saw comfort, warmth, availability, they did not see cost. They did not see that the house required balance, movement, in and out, no. Stagnation. Stagnation invited attention. Attention invited correction. The house survived because it remained untethered. No one was allowed to anchor themselves to it. The women learned this lesson well. Men often learned too late. The house continued to receive visitors. Most passed through without issue. They came. They stayed briefly. They left. That was how it was meant to work. But there would always be men who mistook invitation for belonging. Men who believed access meant ownership. The house corrected those beliefs quietly, efficiently, without explanation. By morning, the lamps were lit again. Music returned. Smiles resumed. The absence of certain men was not acknowledged. The house moved forward. It always did, because it was not built for attachment, only for transactions. And anyone who tried to turn it into something else paid a price, often without realizing when the cost was being collected. There were doors in the house that never opened. At least, not for the women. They blended into the walls so well that new arrivals sometimes did not notice them at first. No markings. No handles that invited touch. Just seams in the wood. Perfectly aligned. Perfectly still. The women learned quickly which doors were meant for them, and which were not. No one needed to explain. Instinct handled it. The locked doors existed in quiet places. At the end of hallways rarely used. Behind staircases that no longer led anywhere important. Between rooms that were otherwise identical. They did not creak. They did not rattle. They did not respond. When the house was busy, they disappeared into the background. When the house grew quiet, they became noticeable. Especially at night. Some women claimed the air felt heavier near those doors. Others said the temperature dropped slightly. Not enough to feel cold. Enough to feel aware. No. One stood near them for long. Even passing by felt intrusive. The women who had been there longest avoided those corridors entirely. They chose longer routes. They made excuses. Anything to keep distance. New women were warned indirectly. If they wandered too far, someone would redirect them. Not urgently. Casually. That area isn't used much. The other hall is nicer. The message was subtle, but firm. Do not linger. The madam never referenced the locked doors. Not in rules. Not in reminders. Their existence was not acknowledged. That omission was intentional. Naming something gave it shape. The house preferred ambiguity. Occasionally, sounds came from behind the doors. Not loud. Not distinct. More like pressure. A sense that something had shifted. The women never discussed these moments openly, but they slept less soundly. Afterward, the locked rooms were not storage. That much was clear. They were not empty. Sometimes, late at night, the crying came closer to those doors. As if drawn to them. As if contained by them. The women noticed the pattern. They did not comment. Commenting would suggest responsibility. Responsibility was dangerous. The unaging women passed the locked doors without reaction. They did not slow. They did not turn their heads. That behavior marked the difference between familiarity and fear. One woman, newer and more curious than most, once pressed her ear to a door. just briefly. She claimed she heard breathing, slow, measured, not distressed, aware. The next day, she was reassigned. Her room moved. Her schedule changed. She did not approach the doors again. Curiosity had consequences. The locked rooms seemed to exist outside time. They were unaffected by the passing years. While wallpaper faded and floors creaked elsewhere, these doors remained perfect, untouched, as if preserved. That preservation felt intentional. The house protected what was behind them, or contained it. The women were never sure which men were never allowed near the locked rooms. Not even briefly. If one wandered too far, he was redirected firmly. No humor, no charm. The madam herself intervened when necessary. The locked rooms were not part of the service. They were not for sale. That distinction mattered. Some men noticed this boundary. Others challenged it. Those men did not return. Over time, the women began to understand the locked rooms as anchors, points where the house held itself together. Removing them would unravel something. What that something was remained unknown. But the sense of dependence was clear. The house needed those rooms. At night, when the house settled, the locked doors felt closer. As if the corridors shortened. As if distance folded inward. The women lay awake, listening. Not for sound, for change, a shift in pressure, a sense of attention. The locked rooms did not watch. They waited. Waiting was worse, because waiting implied intention. The women learned to align their sleep with ignorance. They slept facing away from certain walls. They avoided dreams that led down narrow halls. When dreams did lead there, they woke quickly. Heart steady, breath controlled. They did not scream. Screaming would suggest panic. Panic invited scrutiny. One night, the crying stopped entirely. Not faded. Stopped. The silence was immediate. Absolute. The women lay still. They felt the absence. Like a vacuum. Something was wrong. The silence lasted longer than any crying ever had. Then, softly, a sound came from behind one of the locked doors. Not crying. Movement. Something adjusting itself. The crying returned the following night. Distant again. Controlled. The house exhaled. So did the women. The locked rooms had corrected something. That realization settled heavily. The women understood then that the locked rooms were not passive. They responded. They balanced. They absorbed what could not be allowed elsewhere. This understanding changed behavior. The women became more careful, more obedient. They followed routines closely. They avoided excess. Anything that might shift the house too far in one direction. Balance mattered. Because imbalance fed the locked rooms. And no one wanted to know what happened when they were fed too much. Some women suspected that the locked rooms once served another purpose, that they had not always been locked. That long ago they were open. Used. Visited. The thought frightened them more than any sound, because if the doors had been closed deliberately, it meant something had gone wrong, something that could not be undone. The locked rooms were not punishment. They were containment. That distinction was important. Punishment implied resolution. Containment implied permanence. Whatever was behind those doors was not meant to be fixed, only managed. The unaging women seemed tied to this management. They appeared near the locked corridors more often than elsewhere. They did not enter, but they lingered. As if monitoring. Stability. As if listening for changes the others could not hear. The women noticed that after certain disappearances, the locked rooms felt more present dot, as if they had absorbed something new. As if the house had redistributed weight, the locked rooms never overflowed dot, they never failed. That reliability was unsettling dot, it suggested experience, and experience suggested repetition. The women stopped imagining what was behind the doors. Imagination made things worse. Reality, whatever it was, remained distant enough to endure. The house did not ask the women to interact with the locked rooms dot. It only asked that they respect them. Respect meant distance dot silence dot compliance dot. Those who complied lasted longer. Those who did not were corrected. The locked rooms did not need guards. Fear handled that dot. Understanding reinforced it dot. By the time a woman had been in the house long enough to fully grasp the importance of the locked rooms, she had already learned not to ask questions. She had already learned that survival depended on knowing where not to look. The locked rooms were part of the house's structure. Not just physically. Psychologically. They held what the house could not release. They ensured that everything else remained calm. Functional. Profitable. The women accepted this without ceremony. Acceptance was easier than resistance, and safer. The locked doors remained closed. Night after night. Year after year. They did not demand attention. They did not need to. Their presence shaped behavior more effectively than any rule. The house continued. Music played. Laughter returned. Visitors came and went. But beneath it all, the locked rooms waited. Silent. Stable. Necessary. And as long as they remained closed, the house endured. Because some things, once contained, could never be allowed back into the open air. And everyone inside the house understood that instinctively, even if no one ever said it aloud. For some women, forgetting happened slowly. So slowly that it did not feel like loss. It felt like relief. At first, it was small details. A hometown that became harder to picture. A street name that no longer surfaced when needed. A face from long ago that blurred at the edges. These lapses did not cause alarm. The Old West demanded constant attention. Survival required focus. Memories that were not immediately useful drifted away. The house encouraged this. Not directly. Gently. There were no reminders of the world beyond its walls. No photographs. No letters kept long. Objects from before were discouraged. They cluttered the mind. They distracted. The women learned that carrying the past made the present heavier. So they set it down. Names were the first to go. Not their current names. Those were chosen. Given. Easy to remember. It was the names from before that faded. Birth names. Family names. They lost their weight. Eventually. They lost their sound. A woman might remember that she once answered to something else, but not what it was. That felt acceptable. That name belonged to a different life. A life that no longer required maintenance. Next came places. The women remembered, leaving somewhere. But the details softened. The color of the land. The shape of the buildings. Those memories no longer returned on their own. They had to be summoned. And summoning them took effort. Effort was tiring. The house rewarded rest. So the women rested. They stopped reaching back. Days filled with routine. Routine filled space. There was little room for reflection. When reflection did occur, it was shallow. It did not dig. Digging uncovered things that had no function here. The women learned what the house valued: presence, availability. Compliance. Memory was optional. Too much memory slowed movement. Some women noticed the forgetting. They mentioned it quietly. I can't remember my sister's face. I know I had one. The responses were gentle. That was a long time ago. People change. Change was framed as natural. Even necessary. The house was about adaptation. Those who adapted lasted. Those who clung to before struggled. Struggle was visible. The women who remembered too much cried more often. They slept poorly. They hesitated. Hesitation was dangerous. So, the others stopped asking questions that might awaken memory. They avoided topics that led backward. They learned to speak about now. Only now. The unaging women never spoke of the past. That example mattered. If they could exist without reference, perhaps everyone could. Forgetting was not immediate. It arrived in waves. Some nights, a woman would wake with a sharp image, a kitchen table, a child's laughter, a song sung badly but with enthusiasm. These memories came without warning. They hurt, not because they were bad, because they felt unreachable. The women learned not to dwell on them. They let the images pass. They rolled over. They returned to sleep, mourning. Routines erased the residue. The house helped. It was easier to forget when the present demanded attention. The forgetting spread unevenly. Some women lost memories quickly. Others held on longer. Those who held on longer often became quieter, more inward. They were observed carefully. Memory made them unpredictable. Eventually, something always tipped. A conversation overheard. A name spoken by mistake. The past resurfaced too strongly. Those women rarely stayed long after that. They left. Or they were reassigned. Or they disappeared. The house did not allow unresolved attachments. Attachments created imbalance. Forgetting restored equilibrium. Over time, the women stopped measuring themselves by who they had been. They measured themselves by how well they fit, how smoothly they moved through the house, how little resistance they felt. Resistance became uncomfortable. It felt like friction against something large and immovable. The house did not push. It waited. Waiting always won. The women who forgot the most seemed calmer. They laughed easily. They slept deeply. They did not dream of other places. They dreamt of the house, always, rooms, soft light. These dreams were not frightening. They were neutral, almost pleasant. The house felt familiar even in sleep. That familiarity replaced longing. Longing required a destination. When destinations faded, longing dissolved. The women began to think of the house as the beginning, not the middle, not a detour. The beginning. That shift was subtle, but powerful. Some could no longer imagine a life outside, not because they were forbidden, because the idea lacked shape. What would they do? Where would they go? The answers did not form. The world beyond the house became abstract, distant, like a story heard long ago. The women noticed they spoke differently. They used fewer references. Fewer comparisons. Everything existed in relation to the house. Time was measured by seasons of business. By faces that came and went. By who was still there. The locked rooms did not cause forgetting, but forgetting made them easier to accept. If you no longer remembered what freedom felt like, containment felt normal. The crying at night became less disturbing to those who forgot more. They heard it, but it did not stir questions. Questions required context. Context had faded. The house felt complete on its own. Self-contained. The women who remembered more felt increasingly isolated. They spoke less. Their thoughts no longer aligned with the rhythm of the house. That misalignment was noticeable. The madam watched closely. She did not intervene immediately. Intervention was a last step. First, the house tried patience. Routine. Repetition. If memory softened, the problem resolved itself. If not, other measures followed. Forgetting was not forced. That was the important distinction. It was encouraged. Nurtured. Rewarded. The women were not punished for remembering. They were simply made uncomfortable by it. Discomfort taught them what to release. Over time, the women learned to stop asking themselves who they had been. The question stopped appearing. When it did, it felt unnecessary. Like asking why the walls were built this way. They simply were. The unaging women were the unaging women were the someone built this way. They simply were. The unaging women were the final proof. They existed entirely within the house. They had no visible history. No before. They did not mourn that absence. They embodied what forgetting could achieve. Stability. Permanence. A role without edges. Some women feared becoming like them. Others found comfort in the idea. To exist without regret, without comparison. Without the ache of missing. Forgetting was not emptiness. It was fullness of the present. That was how the house framed it. And the house framed everything. Eventually, even fear of forgetting faded. Fear required imagination. Imagination required memory. Without memory, fear softened. It became caution. Caution was manageable. The women who forgot the most became the most reliable. They followed rules instinctively. They anticipated needs. They moved as bows if guided. The house responded well to them. They were rewarded with ease. Ease was valuable. The women understood that ease was not freedom, but it was comfort. Comfort was enough. The world beyond the house became a rumor. Something that might have existed. Something that no longer mattered. The women did not miss it. Missing required attachment. Attachment had been released. Gently. Night after night. Memory after memory. Until the house was all that remained. Not as a prison, but as a complete environment. Self-sustaining. Self-explanatory. The women slept. They woke. They worked. They rested. They did not look back. And in that quiet forgetting, the house grew stronger. Because nothing binds more effectively than the absence of alternatives. And nothing lasts longer than a place that teaches those inside it how to forget everything else. There were a few women who did not forget by accident. They remembered on purpose. At first, no one noticed. Intentional remembering looked similar to hesitation. A pause before answering. A distant look during conversation. The house had seen hesitation before. It did not react immediately, but remembering on purpose was different. It carried direction. The women who remembered deliberately did small things. They repeated names in their minds before sleep. They pictured places again and again, even when the details hurt. They held on to memories that served no function inside the house. They treated memory like an object, something fragile, something that could be lost. If not handled carefully, they did not speak about it openly. They understood instinctively that memory was private and dangerous. One woman traced the outline of a face she no longer fully remembered. Not with her hands, with attention. She forced herself to recall the shape of a smile, the sound of laughter, the feeling of standing somewhere open. The memory resisted. It blurred, but she persisted. Persistence mattered. The house noticed. Persistence not immediately, but inevitably. The women who remembered on purpose slept differently. They dreamed more vividly not of the house, of other places. These dreams were not peaceful. They were sharp, full of edges. Waking from them left the women unsettled, but also alert. Alertness was unusual. The house preferred softness. The women who remembered began to feel out of rhythm. They noticed details others ignored. The way certain halls seemed to narrow at night. The way the unaging women watched without appearing to look. The way silence felt intentional. Awareness sharpened. With awareness came discomfort. The women understood the cost. They accepted it because remembering felt like proof that something existed beyond the house, beyond routine. Beyond containment. The women did not plan escape. Planning required hope. Hope felt dangerous. They only remembered. That was enough. Memory resisted. The house is complete. Old. The resistance registered. Subtly. Schedules shifted. Assignments changed. The remembering women were separated from one another. Not dramatically. Casually. They were placed on different floors. Different hours. They rarely crossed paths. Isolation made remembering harder, but not impossible. One woman used the locked doors as anchors. She did not approach them. She did not touch them. She simply acknowledged them mentally. She told herself that whatever was contained, there was not the beginning, that it was the result. This distinction mattered. Cause versus outcome. The house relied on blurred timelines. Remembering required sequence. Before and after. The women who remembered kept track of order. Even when details slipped, order remained. They knew the house had not always been. That knowledge created distance. Distance created perspective. Perspective was threatening. The house responded gently. Comfort increased. Ease returned. The remembering women were given rest, better rooms, fewer demands. The house attempted to soften them. To make memory less necessary. Some accepted this. Memory faded. Resistance dissolved. But others refused. They recognized comfort as negotiation. Negotiation implied stakes. Stakes implied risk. The women chose risk. They held on to memory even when it hurt. Even when it made sleep difficult. Even when it created longing. Longing was dangerous. But it was also proof of self. The house preferred women without edges. Memory created edges. The madam observed quietly. She did not confront. Confrontation would validate resistance. Instead, she waited. Waiting had always worked. One woman spoke a name aloud by mistake. Not loudly. Not intentionally. The sound froze the room. No one reacted immediately. But the silence that followed was different. Tighter. That night. The crying came earlier. Closer. The woman did not sleep. She listened. Not with fear. With recognition. The crying was memory. Contained. Compressed. She understood them with the locked rooms held. Not people. Not bodies, but unresolved selves. Fragments that could not be erased, only contained. The women who remembered began to feel watched. Not by eyes, by structure. By response. The house adjusted around them. Doors closed sooner. Paths changed subtly. They were guided without instruction. The guidance grew firmer, still polite, still quiet, but unmistakable. One woman found her personal items missing. Not stolen. Removed. Objects tied to memory vanished. A ribbon. A small mark carved into wood. The house cleaned memory away when it could. The women compensated internally. They memorized details. Instead. Words. Sequences. Numbers. Anything that could not be taken. Memory shifted from emotional to structural. They remembered. Facts. Patterns. Rules. This made them harder to absorb, harder to soften. The house responded with pressure. Not force. Pressure. Time felt heavier around them. Moments stretched. Waiting grew uncomfortable. Other women avoided them, not out of fear, out of instinct. The remembering women disturbed. The calm. Calm was valued. Disturbance invited correction. One by one, the remembering women disappeared. Not suddenly. Gradually. They were reassigned. Moved. Given roles that required focus. Their mental space narrowed. Some lost the energy to remember. Memory requires effort. Exhaustion erodes effort. Those women forgot eventually. Others did not. Those women vanished. Entirely. No explanation. No announcement. The house absorbed the disruption. The remaining women felt it. A shift. A tightening. They remembered. Less afterward. Not because they chose to. Because something inside them hesitated. They had seen what remembering could cost. The unaging women never intervened. They observed. Their stillness carried weight. They had once remembered, or perhaps they still did, but they no longer resisted. That distinction mattered. The house did not erase memory completely. It contained it. Those who remembered without resisting survived longer. Those who resisted were corrected. The difference was subtle. Acceptance versus opposition. The women learned this lesson quickly. They learned to let memory surface gently. Briefly. Then release it. Like touching a hot surface. Just enough to confirm it was real. Not enough to burn. The house stabilized. The threat diminished, but traces remained. Sometimes, late at night, a woman would wake with a clear thought. I was someone before this. The thought would hover. Then fade. The fading brought relief. Relief replaced fear. The house rewarded relief. Morning came. Routine resumed. The cycle continued. The house did not fear memory. It feared intention. Remembering by accident was manageable. Remembering on purpose was not. Because intention suggested choice. Choice suggested exit. Exit suggested loss of control. The house had learned long ago how to deal with that. Quietly. Efficiently. Without spectacle. The women sensed this, even if they could not articulate it. They adjusted. They survived. They forgot just enough, and those who did not were absorbed into the deeper layers of the house. Layers that did not speak. Did not age. Did not leave. Layers that remembered everything. So that the rest could forget. There was a night when the house faltered. Not dramatically. Not in a way that drew immediate attention. It did not collapse. It did not erupt. It hesitated. That hesitation was subtle, but it was felt by everyone. Inside. It began with timing. Small things fell out of rhythm. Lamps took longer to dim. Music ended too early. Doors closed a moment too late. The women noticed. They always did. Routine was precise. Any deviation stood out. At first, they assumed fatigue, a busy week, too many visitors. But the feeling did not pass. It deepened. The air felt thick, not heavy. Uncertain. As if the house itself was listening too closely. That night, the crying began before midnight. This had never happened before. The sound rose slowly. Tentative. As if unsure whether it was allowed. The women lay still. They did not move. Early crying meant something was wrong. The house tolerated many things, but it followed its own order. Breaking order meant pressure had built somewhere else. The unaging women appeared more frequently that evening. They moved through the halls, without purpose. Or perhaps with too much. They paused. They listened. They adjusted lamps and curtains that did not need adjusting. Their presence unsettled the others. It suggested preparation. Preparation implied risk. The madam remained calm. She spoke less than usual. She watched. Watching was her role. Men arrived as wives. She spoke less than usual. They always did. But something felt off. Their voices sounded louder. Their laughter sharper. As if the house's usual dampening effect had weakened. The women compensated. They lowered their own voices. They slowed their movements. They tried to restore balance through behavior. Balance mattered. They had learned that, but balance could not be imposed from the outside. It had to come from the house itself. The crying intensified. It did not grow louder. It grew closer. The sound pressed against the walls. The women felt it through the floor, a vibration rather than a noise. Some held their breath. Others closed their eyes. Sleep did not come. The locked rooms responded. Not audibly, spatially. Corridors near them felt tighter. Shorter. As if the house had folded inward. The women avoided those areas instinctively. They did not need instruction. The house had taught them where danger concentrated. One woman stumbled. Not physically. Mentally. A memory surfaced too clearly. A name. A place. The memory did not blur. It remained sharp. She froze. The house noticed. Pressure increased around her. The air felt thin. She did not scream. She did not run. She let the memory go. The pressure eased. The lesson was reinforced. Memory, when combined with instability, was dangerous. That night, several women dreamed the same thing. They walked through hallways that led nowhere. Doors opened into other doors. Rooms repeated. The house had lost its internal map. When they woke, the feeling lingered. Disorientation. The house depended on clarity. That clarity had wavered. Somewhere, something had resisted containment too strongly. The women did not know what, but they felt the effect. Men began leaving early. Not all at once. Individually. Without explanation. They felt it too. They could not name it. But the comfort they expected was absent. The house did not hold them the way it usually did. The crying stopped abruptly. Not resolved. Interrupted. Silence followed. The silence was worse. It rang. It pressed against the ears. The women waited. Waiting felt longer than usual. Time stretched. Minutes became indistinct. The unaging women gathered near the locked corridors. They did not speak. Their stillness carried tension. They stood like mockers, like boundaries. The madam joined them. This was rare. She did not approach the doors. She stood at a distance. She listened. The house was correcting itself. slowly, carefully, whatever imbalance had occurred was being absorbed. Redistributed, the women felt a pull, as if something were being drawn downward into deeper layers. Layers that did not resist. Layers that existed for this purpose. The locked rooms held. They always did. But holding required capacity. Something had nearly exceeded it. That was what frightened the house. Not rebellion. Not memory. Excess. Too much unresolved weight at once. The house survived by managing accumulation. That night, accumulation had surged. Perhaps too many had remembered. Perhaps one had resisted too strongly. The house did not blame. It adjusted. Adjustment took time. The women remained still. They did not interfere. Interference would worsen things. Eventually, the air shifted. Breathing felt easier. The corridors felt longer again. The house exhaled. The crying did not return that night. Morning arrived quietly. The lamps brightened. Slowly, routine resumed. But something had changed. The women felt it. Immediately. Not damage. Awareness. The house had limits. That knowledge settled heavily. Limits meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the rules mattered more than ever. The madam spoke that morning. Briefly. She reminded the women of rest. Of calm. Of attention. She did not reference the night. She did not need to. The message was clear. Do not push. Do not test. The house had corrected itself once. It might not tolerate another strain so easily. The unaging women returned to their usual patterns. They were quieter, more watchful. If they remembered anything of that night, they did not show it. The locked rooms felt fuller. Not louder. Denser. The women avoided them more carefully. They sensed the cost that had been paid. The women who remembered on purpose remembered less after that night. Not because they chose to, because something inside them hesitated. The house had demonstrated consequence. Not punishment. Consequence. That distinction mattered. Punishment could be resisted. Consequence was structural. It could not be argued with. The house did not threaten. It demonstrated. The women adjusted. They always did. Life returned to normal, but normal felt narrower. More controlled. The margins had shrunk. The house required greater compliance now. Greater softness. Greater forgetting. The women provided it because they understood something they had not before. The house could almost lose control, and when it did, everyone inside felt the strain. Survival depended on preventing the house endured. It always had, but endurance came at a cost. That cost was paid quietly. By memory. By resistance. By those who pushed too far, even briefly. The women slept that night. Lightly. They dreamed less. Dreams required looseness. The house preferred containment. And after coming so close to losing itself, it tightened its hold. Carefully. Precisely. Enough to remind everyone inside that stability was fragile. And that it depended on silence, compliance, and the willingness to let go. By morning, the house was calm again. But it remembered the night it nearly failed, and so did everyone else, even if no one ever spoke of it again. After the night the house nearly faltered, nothing obvious changed. That was the first thing the women noticed, that there were no new rules, no announcements, no visible corrections. The house opened as it always had. Lamps were lit. Music returned. Voices softened into familiar patterns. Visitors arrived. They smiled. They relaxed. They felt what they had always felt. Comfort. The women watched carefully. They waited for signs, but the house did not need to announce its decisions. It expressed them through stability, through the absence of disruption. That absence was deliberate. The house had learned something about itself, and learning did not require display. The locked rooms remained closed. They felt fuller. Now, not louder, heavier, as if they had accepted something new and settled around it. The women sensed this without knowing how. They moved with greater care. They did not linger. They did not press against boundaries. They respected distance. Distance preserved balance. The crying returned, but it was different, not weaker, more contained, as if it now knew exactly how much space it was allowed. The women accepted this. Acceptance had become instinct. The unaging women resumed their quiet routines. They did not speak of the night. They did not acknowledge change, but they watched more closely. They measured the house in ways others could not. They listened for subtle shifts. None came. The house was calm. That calm was not relief. It was resolution. The women who had remembered on purpose remembered less now, not because memory had been erased, because intention had softened. They no longer pushed. They no longer tested. They remembered in passing. Briefly. Then let go. The house rewarded this behavior. Ease returned. Sleep deepened. Dreams faded into gentle fragments. The women felt lighter. Not freer, but steadier. Steadiness was enough. The madam moved through the house, as she always had. Unhurried. Observant. She did not correct. She did not guide. She trusted the structure. Trust was earned. The house had proven itself. It had bent. Not broken. That mattered. Time passed. Not measured in days. Measured in continuity. Faces changed. Names cycled. The house absorbed them all. The town beyond shifted. Buildings rose and fell. Roads changed. Direction. The house remained. It did not resist the world. It simply outlasted it. The women noticed that the house no longer felt like a place where something might happen. It felt complete. Self-contained. Nothing pressed outward. Nothing strained inward. Balance had been restored. The locked rooms no longer felt like threats. They felt like foundations. Necessary. Unquestioned. The women did not imagine what would happen if they opened. That curiosity had faded. Curiosity belonged to earlier versions of themselves. Versions that had been softer. Less aligned. The crying continued to mark the nights. It no longer unsettled. It reminded. That was its purpose. Reminder without invitation. Presence without explanation. The women slept through it more often, not because they did not hear it, because it no longer demanded attention. Attention created imbalance. The house preferred flow. Men came and went. Most stayed, briefly. Some tried to linger. The house corrected this gently. Firmly. As it always had. Nothing changed, which was the point. The house had reached its preferred state. Not perfection. Equilibrium. The women felt it in their bodies. Movements required less thought. Decisions came easily. They knew where to be, when to speak. When to remain quiet. They did not question why. Why created friction. Friction created noise. Noise invited attention. The house did not like attention. The unaging women remained unchanged. They were not immortal. They were complete. Completion looked like stillness. They had reached the end of adjustment. They did not resist. They did not remember too sharply. They existed fully inside the house. That was their role. And roles were respected. The women no longer imagined leaving, not because leaving was impossible, because the idea lacked urgency. The house provided structure. Structure reduced anxiety. Reduced anxiety reduced desire. Desire created imbalance. The house discouraged imbalance. The women understood this. Without words, understanding had replaced questioning. That was the final shift. There were no dramatic endings. No escapes. No revelations spoken aloud. The house did not need confession. It did not need explanation. It functioned. That was enough. On quiet nights, when the lamps dimmed and the hall softened, the women sometimes felt a sense of completeness settle over everything. Not happiness, not sadness. Alignment. The house had absorbed all resistance. Not by force. By time. By patience. By offering ease in exchange for edges. The women accepted the exchange. It was not negotiated. It was gradual. The house did not trap. It replaced. It replaced longing with routine. Memory with presence. Choice with rhythm. And in doing so, it became permanent. The town beyond would continue to change. That was unavoidable. But the house would remain. It had learned. How? By keeping everything that entered it in motion, except what needed to stay still. The locked rooms held what could not move. The crying released what could not be erased. The women lived between those forces. Balanced. Contained. Safe. The house did not fear endings. It absorbed them. Every ending became another layer. Another reinforcement. Another reason it endured. By morning, light filtered in as it always had. The women rose. They dressed. They moved into the day. Nothing felt unfinished. Nothing felt unresolved. The house was whole, and it would continue to be, because no one inside it was still asking to leave, and no one outside it fully understood what it kept. The doors opened. The house breathed. The rhythm held. And in that quiet continuity, everything was decided. Without words, without witnesses, without the need for anything more.